Thank you very much. I am delighted and honored to be back. I was here last December to speak on behalf of this great cause. And this is now a time for action. I learned some things about Benghazi today that I actually had never heard before. And by remarkable coincidence, well, my wife Debbie is here. I'd like her to say hello. By the way, if you saw the latest film, Death of a Nation, Debbie sings the Celtic woman ballad, "O America," in the movie. Well, we're going from here to Liberty University, where I'm going to speak at the convocation on Monday. But then we're going to Washington, D.C., and I'm going to give a talk there, but I'm also going to meet President Trump. My wife, Debbie, has an agenda for President Trump. She wants to tell him what to do with that fascist SOB who's running Venezuela, Maduro. But I now have an agenda. I'm actually going to ask the president to release Presidential Study Directive number 11. Because if it actually says what we think it does, I'd like to put it in my next movie to come out in the summer of 2020 and help the president be reelected. Now, all of this suggests that all of what we've been hearing today suggests that something is actually deeply wrong in the America that we were raised to believe in. For most of my career, I was a writer, a think tank scholar, and I tended to see American politics as a kind of intellectual debate. We have two sides. They have a rival set of principles, and we're having a kind of great national argument over which principles should prevail in American society, and that's really what elections are all about. Then I had a sort of direct experience with the Obama administration, very unpleasant, I have to say. It involved me, a very idealistic immigrant who thought of America in terms of its ideals, the ideals of the founders, the pursuit of happiness, created equal. Suddenly finding myself in a courtroom where I hear a bailiff stand up and go, "The United States of America versus Dinesh D'Souza." Wow, those are chilling words for any immigrant to hear. And then as the process went forward, a process, by the way, involving three important individuals, Barack Obama, Eric Holder, and then a kind of local Indian water boy named Preet Bharara, my prosecutor from New York. This is the kind of character you would get right out of the movie Slumdog Millionaire. A thug of a very familiar Indian type, but nevertheless ensconced now in the government and sitting across from me, peppering me with questions. "Did you exceed the campaign finance law?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I was trying to help a college friend of mine running for the U.S. Senate. I did give too much. I did exceed the campaign finance law, so give me whatever penalty you would give anyone else who did the same thing." And that's the moment at which things get interesting, because they go, "Not so fast. We're going to get you on bank fraud." I go, "Bank fraud?" They go, "Yeah, because you took your money out of your bank account." I go, "Whoa." And they go, "We're also going to get you on mail fraud." I go, "Mail fraud?" They go, "Yeah, because you put your check in the mail." I go, "Whoa." And it suddenly then occurred to me that they were taking what I did and redescribing it 7 different ways. They were dipping into that vast accordion of federal statutes that they have. They were actually using statutes that had been put into place to fight the mafia and ISIS. In other words, you can't get Al Capone, so you figure out a way to get him on a technicality. These laws now deployed against American citizens, and my real crime in their eyes was that I was not seen by them as a critic, a dissenter, a political opponent. I was seen as a bad guy, an enemy that they should take out. If the Obama administration could have locked me up for 10 years, they would have been delighted to do it. Why? Because that was their goal. How do we disable this guy, destroy his life, ruin his relationship with his family? And it occurred to me, wow, that is also the America we live in now. And my mind flashed back to when I was 17 years old and first came to America, and I have to say that that was a more idealistic time. And I think actually the earlier speaker, Mr. Shipp, was right when he said that this was not always the Democratic Party. I remember, of course, and many of you will, the Carter administration. Now, Jimmy Carter was not a successful president, but he wasn't a successful president because he didn't know better. If we were handing out an award for presidential nincompoopery over the past 100 years, I think we know who the leading contender would be. But this is a case where we have to admit that innocence is somewhat redeeming, because Carter's mistakes were, by and large, well-intentioned. Let's watch one of them because it's a very vivid contrast with Benghazi. Carter comes in and his advisors tell him, look, you've got this really bad guy in Iran called the Shah. He has a secret police. He arrests dissenters. We got to get rid of him. So Jimmy Carter goes, okay, let's pull the Persian rug out from under him. And we do that, and whoops, we get Khomeini. Now, the reason this was a horrible blunder is it ignores what is actually the prime principle of foreign policy, any country's foreign policy, which is, of course, the principle of the lesser evil. The principle of the lesser evil says that in trying to get rid of the bad guy, try to make sure you don't get the worse guy. Try not to go from the frying pan into the fire, to use the old proverb. And that's what happened. But it didn't happen deliberately. It wasn't like Jimmy Carter wanted Khomeini. He was too dumb to see that in trying to get rid of the Shah, he might get... And in fact, if you think about it, that was actually the beginning of Islamic radicalism. Khomeini was the first radical Muslim to take a hold of a major country. So that was the root of it. But from our side, the error was one of gross incompetence. Now, that is a stark contrast with what has happened under the Obama administration, which is the gangsterization of the Democratic Party. Now, this gangsterization, I think, has two separate and independent sources. And the sources can be identified by looking carefully at the two main individuals, Obama and Hillary, whose motivations in all this are actually quite different. And in fact, to some degree, they're opposites. They're not the same, they're not cut from the same cloth. What you really have is the marriage, I believe, of anti-Americanism and racketeering. Anti-Americanism and racketeering. In the case of Obama, it's anti-Americanism. In the case of the Clintons, it's racketeering. This is Bonnie and Clyde. These people stay one step ahead of the posse. And they're in it for themselves and for the power and for the money. But that's not what Obama's in it for. To understand this, in fact, you have to go back a little to my earlier film on Obama, 2016 Obama's America. I got this insight when reading Obama's book, The Dreams of His Father. Dreams from My Father is the title of that book. And Obama's father was an anti-American. He was an anti-colonialist who believed that Western power and America have ruined the world. He believed that rich countries are rich because they have made poor countries poor. They have stolen their wealth. And out of this anti-colonialism comes a foreign policy that is almost too shocking to name, but was in fact the guiding foreign policy of this country for 8 years. It can be summarized in a very simple way. Take America down. reduce American wealth and power, strengthen our enemies, and weaken our friends. Now, it seems almost unspeakable that an elected American president who swears an oath on the Constitution would actually try to do this. But the evidence is very obvious that he did. Because if you look at the bad guys in the Middle East, there were two kinds of bad guys in them, two kinds of dictators, if you want to call it that. There were those who were friendly to us, and Obama went after them. And then there are those who are hostile to us, like the mullahs in Iran, and Obama coddled them. And so the empirical evidence is that, in fact, in those 8 years, we worked diligently, we meaning the US government, to undermine our allies and strengthen our enemies, all aimed with an ideological vision of taking the ship of the world, which was seen to be, you may say, tilting in the wrong direction, and to try to set the ship of the world straight, to try to rectify the crimes of history and redistribute not just wealth, but power around the world. It's not that Obama's a secret Muslim, but he saw that by strengthening the radical Muslims in the Middle East, he would weaken U.S. power in the region. And he set about determinedly to do that. And unlike Jimmy Carter, Obama is actually competent in achieving those goals. Achieving those goals represented for him a success. Now, if the Clintons are a little bit of a different matter, and I think if we look back to see when this thing turned, when did the Democratic Party actually become gangsterized? When did this web of lies and deceit that is now being almost serially unmasked, that we see also playing out in front of our eyes with Kavanaugh and so many things, even this orchestrated caravan? Thousands of people decide simultaneously. There's no famine, there's no revolution, but they all decide to suddenly march 2,000 miles. Where do they sleep? Who feeds them? They recently sued Trump. They've obviously got civil rights lawyers on their payroll. They're filing, non-citizens are filing constitutional cases under the Fourth Amendment. I mean, how did we get this? The turning point, I think, actually, and this was said or intimated a little earlier, was also in the Clinton years. Now, Bill Clinton actually was a little too preoccupied with other things to be either a true anti-American or a true gangster. He was a little too hormonal to do either of those two things well. But the lies began with Bill Clinton. And I don't just mean the lies about that woman, I mean the lies about policy. The one that sticks out in my mind looking back and remembering is Bill Clinton's insistence after 9/11 that he never knew where bin Laden was. And I thought to myself, really? This is a man who was preaching in the mosque in Kandahar. Announced. This is a man who, if I remember, during the 1990s was interviewed more than once by Peter Arnett of CNN. This is a man who was interviewed by John Miller of Time Magazine and ABC News. This is a man who was interviewed by the BBC, interviewed more than once by Al Jazeera. All these media figures were able to find Bill Clinton, but apparently US intelligence agencies could not. So the lies then began to build one on top of the other. And when Obama and Hillary came in, you actually had two people who had been schooled in what one could call the art of Alinskyism. A reference here to Saul Alinsky, the mafia-trained political thug. I say this because Alinsky gave interviews in which he said, the stuff I learned in politics I got from the mob. When Alinsky was in Chicago, he would hang around with mobsters and kept asking them questions. How do you do this? How do you do that? One time, one of the mobsters said to Alinsky, we're bringing this guy in from Atlanta to commit all these murders. And Alinsky was like, why bring the guy in? It's kind of expensive. Why don't you use a local guy? And the mob had to explain to him, you can't use a local guy because he might know the guys he's killing. They have families. He might feel reluctant. He knows the kids. Bringing an outsider is great because that guy doesn't know anybody. It's anonymous. And Alinsky's like, wow, I got to keep that lesson in mind. And in the 60s, a group of activists came to Alinsky And they said to him, there's a big Republican event being planned. The great thing is we've got all our signs that we're going to go and wave, and they compared the Republicans to the Ku Klux Klan. This was a brilliant idea. And Alinsky, who was a Machiavellian, had a very diabolical mind, he said to them, don't do that. Don't go with signs saying that these guys are Klansmen. What you should do is go down to your Bed Bath & Beyond and buy some white sheets, punch some holes into it, dress up like the Ku Klux Klan. Go to the Republican event, and every time the speaker comes up to speak, you jump up and down and cheer everything they say. In other words, act like the Klan is totally behind the Republican Party. Now, Alinsky was a smart guy. He knew perfectly well that the Ku Klux Klan was founded by the Democratic Party, that the Ku Klux Klan was revived by that progressive Democrat, Woodrow Wilson, that if you made a list from the 1860s to now of every Klan leader in every Clavern and Clonsilium and Grand Wizard and Grand Dragon in the Klan, 99% of those guys would be Democrats. Alinsky knew all this. His point was, how do you deceitfully take the Ku Klux Klan and all the murder and lynching it represents and pin it on the other guy? And his answer was, if you dress up as Klansmen, the media will do our work for us. The media will play along. They know better too. But for them, it's a stage. It's a tableau. They will shoot it and they will record it. It'll be on the evening news, and we will succeed in tarring our opponents in this way. All of this is really well worth remembering because the Clintons and the Obamas took it to the White House. The Kavanaugh hearings was essentially an enactment of this same ritual. You create a stage, you put on a performance, and you know this is the power of the deep state on the inside. It has media allies on the outside, and they work in concert. Now, how they work in concert is actually worth thinking about, because in other countries, and Debbie was born in Venezuela. In Venezuela, for Hugo Chavez and Maduro to subdue the media, they had to send thugs to the reporters' offices to intimidate them, threaten them, beat them up. That's the only way to get the media to conform. But in our country, the media is willing to do the job unpaid, unintimidated, unthreatened, unbeaten up. They're willing to do it. Why? What's in it for them? What's going on here? The truth of it is, in our politics, we have a fight, but it's not a fight between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. If it was just that, the Republican Party would do very well. It's a fight between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, allied with academia and the media and Hollywood. Hollywood here referring to the whole entertainment industry, the music industry, Broadway, all the comedians. And these people are flaying our side all the time on every conceivable platform. So this is the uneven nature of the fight. Now, so they've got not only the deep state and the Democratic Party, and to a large degree, you may call it the large megaphones of the culture. They have all that. And what do we have? Well, we do have Trump. Now, the remarkable thing about Trump, I'm a creature of the Reagan years. I became a young conservative in the 80s. And sometimes I think back and try to compare Reagan and Trump, because Reagan was a man of priorities. Reagan would focus on one or two things. He didn't believe you could change the world in 30 ways. You can change the world in maybe 2 ways. The Soviet Empire, stagflation, and the rest of it, you sort of have to let it go. What I find remarkable about Trump, this guy fights on every front. I mean, he's doing the trade pact, and he's nicking away at Obamacare, he's pushing through the tax reform, and he's fixing the court. And the great thing is that while he's doing all this, he finds time to swat Meryl Streep. Boom. Saturday Night Live, failing CNN. In other words, Trump, who came out of popular culture to a degree, recognizes the importance of fighting on the political and the cultural front both. My small experience of this was when I was sitting, and this was actually in between the last time I was here and now. I was sitting in my office, doing my stuff, and the phone rings. It's the White House operator. Is this Mr. Dinesh D'Souza? Yes, it is. Hold the line for the President of the United States. Here comes Trump. And the great thing was that he was in a very Trumpian mood. He goes, "Hey, Dinesh, I'm sitting here with General John Kelly. You know John Kelly, don't you?" I'm like, "No, I don't know John Kelly. I know who he is, but I don't know the guy." And then Trump began to speak, and it was about my case. And his first words were, "Got to tell you about your case." He goes, "Man to man, you got screwed." And then he said other things, but I realized I couldn't even really hear him because it was settling into me the implications of what he was saying. And it wasn't just that I was going to get pardoned, and it wasn't just that this would mean just the wiping out of the cleaning of my record, and it wouldn't mean that the left couldn't call me a felon, and I would get my American dream back. But at the back of it, the political implication of it was really clear to me that this action was a giant up yours to the Obama administration. Oh, yeah. Now, in politics, we have to fight in teams. This has always been true historically, and it's true even now. Ultimately, what we're facing isn't just fake news. There is fake news. There was fake news in Benghazi. All of this is due to a video. There was fake news from Obama. If you want to keep your doctor, you can keep your doctor. But we also need to realize that behind fake news is fake history and fake scholarship, and really a whole faked narrative about our own country. And the left's accusations against Trump and against conservatives rely on these fake narratives. Trump is a fascist. Well, behind that is the fake news that fascism is a phenomenon of the right. If fascism wasn't a phenomenon of the right but of the left, it would make no sense to call Trump a fascist. Now, the idea that fascism is a phenomenon of the right is widespread. It's in our textbooks, it's on the History Channel, it's in Wikipedia. A lot of young people know it to be true, even though, in fact, it is false. And they know it to be true because they see it in all these different places. And they don't realize that all of what they see is the product of progressive historiography. And this long predates Trump, long before Trump. In fact, right when the embers were settling on World War II, right when American troops went into the concentration camps and pulled out those ghostly, emaciated figures, stumbling and starving, and suddenly, before the whole world, fascism was instantly discredited. And the young progressives now coming into academia and the media who knew that fascism was a phenomenon of the left, who knew that Mussolini was a longtime Marxist, who knew that Hitler's party was the National Socialist Party, who had seen the Nazi platform, the 25-point platform with its whole agenda: government control of the banks, government control of healthcare, government control of education. They knew all this. They knew that FDR was a huge fan of Mussolini. They knew that Mussolini reviewed FDR's book and praised it to the skies. They knew that the Nazi newspapers, the Volkischer Beobachter, were praising FDR's election, praising the New Deal. All of this in-bedness that had gone on in the 30s had to be hidden, covered up, swept under the rug, left out of every textbook. And in fact, it is. It is. If you watch my movie, there's a scene in the movie dated 1935. A group of senior Nazis are sitting around a table. They're passing the Nuremberg laws, which make Jews into second-class citizens. And they have in their hands the democratic laws of the Jim Crow South. They're looking at them. They go, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We want racist legislation. The Democrats have it. All we have to do is cross out the word black, write in the word Jew, and we're off to the races. Now, people who watch the movie, they go, where's Dinesh getting this? And in fact, I have to concede that this information is not in a single textbook to my knowledge. It's never been published in an article to my knowledge. And yet, there it is in the historical record, incontrovertibly true. I have the transcripts. So what's happened really is that the progressives, coming to power in the 40s and 50s, decided to clean up the record. They were academic James Comeys. They were intellectual Susan Blasey Fords. They orchestrated things, and they realized that if we leave stuff out and sweep it under the rug, all future generations will come to know things that aren't true. What we have to do, our task, is to take fascism from the left-wing column, where it's always belonged, and move it into the right-wing column. So from now on, we can use the fascist label to smear our opponents. We can call ourselves Antifa so that they can be Fa. They're the fascists, and we're the anti-fascists. And we can now do fascist things to them in the name of fighting fascism. This is the America we have now. Now, it's a divided America. It's not the America we actually want. It's a less civil, nastier, more savage place. Trump did not create this America. It created him. It created him. And what I mean by this is that Republicans tried for quite a long time to nominate one squeaky clean Boy Scout after another. Bob Dole, Mitt Romney, John McCain. And these are genuinely good guys. And they're clean-cut guys. I mean, if I was writing a college recommendation for Romney, it would begin with something like, not since Jesus Christ. Squeaky clean is Romney. But the moment that Romney climbed on the public stage, the left jumped in on him. They began to mau-mau him in their usual way, and within 15 minutes, they turned him into Lucifer. You greedy, rotten scoundrel. You thug. Where did you get $200 million? How many poor people did you steal from today? And here's Romney, gulping, explaining, apologizing, up against the wall. A good guy on the defensive. Now you notice, Trump has a lot more money than Romney. But no one makes these accusations of Trump, because if you accuse Trump of being a rich guy, he sits you down to explain he's even richer than you thought. It totally doesn't work. Nothing works. I mean, think of the media. These rootless, depraved sickos, these demented, rootless characters, nevertheless realize that the Republicans in general are not. And so they go, listen, if we can find a weapon, the hypocrisy weapon, if we can find some sort of a sex scandal, the kind of sex scandal that we do every day. But nevertheless, if we can pin it on Trump, his own side will murder him. Because that's what Republicans do. And so they did. This was the importance of Stormy Daniels. Stormy Daniels. But with Trump, any other Republican would be, I'm quitting the race. But with Trump, of course, it is, what else you got? Now, I have to admit that there are Republicans and conservatives who say, correctly, that Trump is a flawed man. and he has important human vices. One such vice is Trump has a Himalayan ego. He has a genuinely unbelievable opinion of himself. In my movie poster for Death of a Nation, I morphed the heads of Lincoln and Trump. A controversial move, because a lot of my friends, Republicans, would say, Dinesh, come on, what were you thinking? Lincoln and Trump? How can you compare Trump to Lincoln? But then it occurred to me that actually, this was probably also Trump's view, but from the other side. Trump comes in, and I might get this week. Dinesh, what are you thinking? I mean, Lincoln, the guy with the hat, in the same image as me? In second place, but ego. And yet, in today's fraught political environment where you are being savaged on every platform at every minute, when you are being attacked not just by the media and the comedians, you're being attacked at the Emmys and the Oscars, you're being attacked by people in your own party, hey, it kind of helps to have a gargantuan ego that will insulate you so you can move forward. Ignore it. Pay no attention to the Lilliputians. I've got things to do. Another Trumpian vice, unquestionably, is that if Trump is attacked, and it doesn't matter if he's being attacked by an irrelevant, petty, picayune person, he has an emotional need to attack them back. He has to do it. And this distinguishes him from the typical Republican who is a well-meaning invertebrate. So the typical Republican, if confronted by a kind of unusual, strange, not entirely from planet Earth character like Omarosa, the typical Republican panics and goes under the desk and waits for Omarosa to leave. Because what can be said to such an individual? But not Trump. Trump has the emotional need to hit back. And again, what is ordinarily a human vice, I mean, this is not something we try to teach our children. We try to teach them the opposite, self-restraint. Choose your battles. But in a political environment where Republicans have been so timid, allowed the other side ultimately to set the parameters in which we operate, the power of the media is really the power to humiliate. And they know that. And that's how they've controlled every Republican. People will say to me, we have the House, we have the Senate. Why are our leaders such wimps? The reason they're wimps is they're terrified of the media. Because these guys, Paul, Ryan, McConnell, they know that if the media put them into their sites and bashed them for 3 weeks straight, they would be so badly bruised that their own side would bury them. They don't know how to fight that. And the unruliness of Trump is that he doesn't play by these rules. He doesn't walk in the dotted line. And he attacks the media openly. Debbie and I were at his rally in Texas. I'd never been to a political rally. I thought, this is going to be, not just that I'm patriotic, I want to be there. Actually, I'm a participant, but I also want to be a sociological observer. I kind of want to see Trump do his thing. And there's Trump doing his thing, and his thing is really out there. Reagan would never do that. Trump refers to Maxine Waters as an extremely low IQ individual. He actually implies that she might well be the stupidest person in America. Slightly outpacing Joe Biden, who I think is clearly established as the stupidest man in Delaware. And he unnerves the other side. I mean, they don't know how to respond, and they respond in ways that are self-defeating. So I hear recently that Maxine Waters, taking a leaf out of the page of Elizabeth Warren, is trying to refute Trump by taking an IQ test. She's very excited because reportedly she's found out that she's in the 9th percentile. That means that there are 91% of Americans who are smarter. That's it. Just 91%. So I think she's actually got decisive refutation that Trump is wrong. She's actually not the stupidest person in America. Now, what Trump is doing is kind of what Lincoln did in 1860. He's stiffening the spine of the Republican Party. Lincoln was a very moderate man, but he realized that he was in an immoderate situation. A situation quite similar to now. An outsider, a Republican, gets elected, and all hell breaks loose. And the other side won't accept it, and they want to do whatever they can to undo the result, even if it means undoing the country in the process. And as things got tough, Lincoln got tougher. This is important to realize when we hear all these calls for civility. We do want civility, but how do you get to civility? You don't get to civility by giving in. If Antifa roams our cities and campuses, and if they're able to drive a speaker off campus or beat up people in the audience and cause the college to cancel the event, from Antifa's point of view, it's a victory. It goes down as a big win. If they had taken out Kavanaugh, and this woman had come out later and said, I made the whole thing up, and 1 year from now, Susan Blasey Ford said, I made the whole thing up, they would be treated as civil rights heroes. A brilliant tactical strike. They don't care if Kavanaugh did it or not. They want to take him out. That's their goal. A few years ago, Condoleezza Rice was offered a graduation speaking spot at Rutgers University in New Jersey. There was a little ruckus. Some overgrown students were like, there's no way she's setting foot on our campus. And graceful, ladylike Condoleezza Rice withdrew. And some Republicans went, what a wonderful display of dignity. Not me. To me, this was a disgraceful capitulation. Why? Because if you, Condoleezza Rice, back down, you can be sure no Republican or conservative will ever speak on that campus again. And it's because of you. You made that happen. Because you signed off on this strategy of thuggery that basically says, we're not going to let this happen, and you allowed it. You should have shown up anyway. So the point here, and it's a point drawn from Lincoln, is that when the situation changes, we have to change with it. Now, when the Union Army began to deploy for the first time black troops, Abraham Lincoln was informed that it had become Confederate policy that for every black Union soldier captured, that soldier would be immediately executed. Now, white soldiers were not executed. They were normal prisoners of war. But when Lincoln heard this, he issued what, to my mind, is the most severe, arguably the most barbaric, order to come out of the northern side. For every black Union soldier captured and shot, one Confederate soldier will be summarily executed. Now, why would an ordinarily moderate man do something so harsh? The answer was that Lincoln realized that there is no other way to get the other side to stop other than to do to them what they were doing to you. And, in fact, the Confederacy did stop, and Lincoln withdrew the executive order. The point I'm trying to make is not the crude point that because Antifa's beating up our speakers, we should beat up their speakers. But what I am saying is, it's a time for accountability under the law. And what that means is that if on a state university campus, this is public space, they are depriving students and speakers of their basic First Amendment constitutional rights, it's time to send in the National Guard. Why else do we have a National Guard, if not to protect basic liberties? And finally, this rot goes to the very top. In other words, this corruption is not local corruption on the part of petty gangs. The reason Antifa is powerful is because the mayor of Berkeley, Jesse Aragon, is a member of an Antifa group. The reason Antifa roams unmolested in Portland is because the mayor pulls the cops back. And so the reason we've seen all this gangsterism in America is we've had gangsterism at the highest reaches of the American government. So the supreme task facing Trump is to recognize that his own presidency is in mortal danger and has been since the moment of his election. How did we get Comey? How did we get Mueller? Trump's greatest mistake was not firing those guys on day one. Because by not firing them, it became more politically costly to do it later. And the reason we got Mueller is because of Rod Rosenstein, who should also have been fired on day one. Harder to do it now. And so you have a president who doesn't control his own Justice Department. That may change, if not in the midterms, then on Trump's reelection. But it is the case now that we have a president, and one of the most important agencies of his own executive branch is not only not under his control, but is being effectively deployed by the other side against him, in what someone earlier called correctly an orchestrated soft coup, a desire to sort of get rid of him by trumping up, one might say, an offense. And how can we go on as a nation under law if we don't restore the rule of law? And the Clintons are the standing mockery of that idea. They're laughing at us for our inability to hold them accountable. And we finally have a government that can, and therefore must. Again, this goes against our normal sensibilities, which is, we won the election, let's close the shop, let's move on. This is never the way they think. And it's the disproportion between the way we think and they think that has gotten us into this mess. Think of the Supreme Court. Even before Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, most of the nominees to the Supreme Court were nominated by Republicans. Why then haven't we controlled the court for the past 25 years? Why is it a court so precariously dangling in the middle? Because we can never count on our own nominees. They can. When a Democrat nominates someone to the court, they ask only one question. Will this person be an obedient and devoted and reliable Democrat? That's the only question. They want to count with Euclidean certainty on their votes without having to guess, and they always get them. They always get them. We, on the other hand, it's a guessing game. How's Anthony Kennedy feeling today? Hey, we got Kennedy. Whoops, we lost Roberts. So when you have two sides in politics and they bring a different level of determination, a different level of ruthlessness, they come playing Alinsky, and we come wanting to forgive and forget. That's when you get the lopsided politics in which they take it for granted that they can beat up on us because they know that when we come into power, we won't beat up on them. They can be sure to appoint leftists who ignore the Constitution, knowing that when we appoint guys, we'll try to balance the scales. So I would argue that there are times in American politics where we have to get tough, the way that ultimately Grant did in the Civil War. When people came to Lincoln and they said, Grant is an extremely flawed character. He ran his father's store into bankruptcy. He's reputed to be a womanizer. He has a drinking problem. And Lincoln's argument was, yeah, but he can fight. In other words, these are all very interesting problems. Let's take them up after the war. And similarly now, we are in a fight in which the American dream hangs in the balance. And we're not fighting. This is not a debating society. We're not fighting over our ideas versus their ideas. We're not fighting about the fact that here's a wonderful pie that's been created by technological capitalism. Let's have a genuine argument about how the pie should be distributed. It's not that kind of argument. It's an argument in which their guys want to come into power to control our lives, and they want to control everything. Let me close with this thought. When filming this movie, Death of a Nation, We were in Germany. I was in Munich. I was in Nuremberg. And I saw this interesting footage going back to the 30s of German families draping the swastika flag off their balcony or doing the Heil Hitler salute. And I thought to myself, that's very odd. Why are they doing that? What is the significance of that action? Heil Hitler. Well, Hitler's not there. Why Heil Hitler? Why fly the swastika flag? What are you trying to say? And it occurred to me that what these families are trying to say is not that they were dedicated, enthusiastic, believing Nazis. No. What they were trying to say is, I am a cowardly worm. I am an obedient servant of the state. If you ask me to do something, I will jump. If you ask me to go fight in a war or go beat up this Jewish guy's store or grab that family and put them in the gas ovens, I'm ready to do it. Why? Because I pose no threat to the reigning ideology. Nazis call this Gleichschaltung. Everybody in lockstep with the reigning ideology. And we have that attempted in America now. Sometimes it loosely goes under political correctness, but the basic idea is to bring us all into full subordination. The left wants to control everything. They don't just want, they have the media. They don't need to control it, they already control it. They have Hollywood. They have academia. You think that would be enough? No. They want the NFL. Bunch of big guys with a ball. They want it. They want the Boy Scouts. They got them. They want the Christian baker in Colorado. We're going to force you to make a cake. I won't do it. I'll go to the Supreme Court. You win in the Supreme Court, they sue you again. Why? They want to destroy your life. Not because they hate you. They want everybody else to see what they did to you, so every other cowardly worm will realize, I'm not going to bake a cake. I don't want any trouble. Look here. Hey, here's my swastika flag off my balcony. So we are at a time in America where we've got to stand up and say no to this nonsense. Enough is enough. It's time to use all our influence. In life, most of us use a very little bit, but we have a lot. Sometimes people say, oh gosh, I'm not in social media. I only have 30 friends on Facebook. Yeah, but they've got 30 friends on Facebook. Use the influence you have, devoting, and pick your fights in a creative way. This is why I went into movies. I was writing books, and it was tempting to write another book because I'd written 14 before. But it occurred to me, movies will reach a different audience. I'll see guys in the theater that I would never see in the line in Barnes & Noble. And besides, Michael Moore makes movies. How hard can it be? If that guy can do it. Benghazi is a truly significant event, not just for the tragedy it represents, not just for the evil it represents. Evil, by the way, that is just as vivid on our shores. The people who covered it up, the people who had their own agenda for getting us in that situation in the first place. The people who basically said that here's Gaddafi, by the way, not a good guy, but a guy who had been doing business with us, outing terrorists. Let's get rid of that guy. Let's produce what we now have in Libya, chaos, militias, roaming mobs, a country indisputably worse than it was before. As I say, this was not the incompetence of Carter. This was actually the diabolical agenda of the Obamas and the Clintons. They set about doing it. They then set about covering it up. Their allies in the media are still doing it. This issue has not yet been settled. But with our efforts on Tuesday in the midterm, and then again 2 years later with solid Republican majorities and bold Republican majorities, goodbye Jeff Flake, goodbye Bob Corker, and we need a tougher Republican Party that will hold this gang accountable. And that's how we get our civility back. And that's how we get decency back and rule of law back. And that's how we get back to that vision that Reagan outlined a long time ago when he spoke in that poignant phrase of morning in America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
We can be heroes, serving through the storm. We can be heroes, bringing in the calm. Living with hearts open, we wait on heaven's sign. We can be heroes when it's our time. When our moment comes, we can be the ones. We can be the bearers of hope and comfort. When our season's here and our purpose clear, we can answer love's call with all our heart.